Welcome, this is Najma Minhas with Moeed Pirzada on Global Village Space. A couple of hours earlier, the second president of the UAE, Sheikh Khalifa Bin Zaid, passed away. Condolences have been pouring in from throughout the world. This is an important moment to look at his contribution and the role of the UAE as it has assumed in the world and the region at hand.
Najma, thank you. I think first of all, it's important to say a few words about Sheikh Khalifa Bin Zaid Al Nahyan, who was the ruler since 2004, and for the past 9 years we had not heard much about him because as a result of an unfortunate stroke in 2014, he disappeared from the public scene, and then his half brother Mohammed bin Zaid, which is called as MBZ, has been effectively ruling the UAE. But Sheikh Khalifa bin Zaid Al Nahyan was very important in the history of UAE. Because he started ruling, just like it had happened to himself, he started ruling UAE when his father, who was the architect and the creator of the UAE system, Sheikh Zayed bin Sultan Al Nahyan, fell ill in the early 90s. So for all practical purposes, he was running the UAE system from then onwards. And when he took over formally in 2004, he had already ruled UAE for the past almost 12 years. And his contribution is in terms of improving the social welfare system, because he was the first ruler who seriously pondered over the question of improving the quality of life of the people, creating a welfare system, looking at the health system, the social security, the internal rule and management system, and he contributed massively in it. He was also the formal head and created ideas for the Abu Dhabi Port Trust, Abu Dhabi Investment Authority, which is perhaps one of the largest investment authority or one of the largest investment authority in the world. In 2010, he created the bailout package of $10 billion from Abu Dhabi to Dubai, because when Dubai was in a very deep financial crisis, and as a result, to honor him, the Burj Al Dubai, which was then the tallest tower building in the world, was renamed as Burj Al Khalifa. Very few people know about this. And in 2014, as a result of the stroke, his role was actually taken over by Mohammed bin Zaid, MBZ, who is now a very important man, not only in the regional matters, but across the world. But I think if you ask me, I'll say
You know, I'd like us to go back a little bit and just look at the formation of the UAE. What led to the formation of the UAE, so that we can understand where this country stands today?
I think this is the fundamental thing we need to be looking at is right now. I think the man that has been significantly, the man who is the most significant character, not only in the history of the UAE, but as one of the most important character and architect in the history of the Middle East, it was the father of the Sheikh Khalifa bin Zaid Al Nahyan, was Sheikh Zayed bin Sultan Al Nahyan, a great friend of the people of Pakistan, a great friend of the government of Pakistan. He was very close to the former Prime Minister of Pakistan, Zulfikar Ali Bhutto. He visited Pakistan several times. You can see a lot of pictures of with Pakistani leaders, and he was the man. He was a man of great ideas. He was the man who brought the blueprint and the idea of the UAE, the United Arab Emirates. Before him, till 1968, all these crucial states, which were called crucial states, were independent from each other. They were also warring states that were often at loggerheads with each other. And he created the idea that these crucial states, when Britain was withdrawing from that region in 1968, then he created with the idea that these crucial states should join hands. And the first was the...
what crucial states means what?
You see, Britain created this term crucial states from 1820 onwards. From 1820 till almost 1968, for almost 150 years, all these states which are now part of the UAE, the seven sister states, were called crucial states. They were called crucial states from the word truce, T-R-U-C-E, simple as that. Because Britain entered first into separate truce and then into a joint truce with these states, and Britain wanted them not to interfere with the commercial maritime trade which was flowing toward the British Indian Empire, and also Britain wanted maritime security in the Persian Gulf region. So Britain was not interfering in their warring conflicts between these small states. They were very small states. I mean, from British Empire's point of view, these states of Abu Dhabi, Dubai, Ajman, and Fujairah were very, very small. I mean, just imagine from the point of view that in 1971, the total population of the UAE system was only 270,000. So they were, I mean, just imagine how small the populations might have been in 1820, 1830, and so on. But the crucial, by the agreement of the crucial states, Britain provided essential maritime security to these states. It also guaranteed them security against external aggression from Iran or from other states which were in the region. So the system worked very well. So across the rest of the world, for instance, in India or in Indonesia or in Malaysia or many other parts of the world, wherever the British Empire was, people were actually...
Is that the reason why it was very easy for them to go into later what became the Union Accord in 1968? Because they were already, to some extent, working with each other, with the British.
Yeah, that's true. I mean, that's true. That can be said. But let me explain this thing that in rest of the world, wherever the British Empire was, there were very strong, fierce resistance movements and independence movements. I mean, in case of Malaysia, for instance, the Mau Mau and the others were very ferocious, and Britain had to use a lot of force to continue to rule those areas. Here, the Britain had a lot of political influence in these areas, but these were not British colonies as such. They were entered into an agreement with Britain, and when Britain, the Labour government in 1967-68, decided to withdraw from the crucial states and from the Persian Gulf, these states and the Arab people didn't want them to leave, right? The Emiratis didn't want them to leave. They wanted actually them to stay. But Britain made it clear that because of the changed economic circumstances, because of the change in the value of the pound, because of the internal politics of the Labour Party, the Britain didn't want to stay. It didn't want to basically keep its overseas stations and coastal, maritime power. So Britain wanted to withdraw. And when Britain wanted to withdraw, either Britain...
So there was no freedom struggle for freedom from the British?
Absolutely not. There was no freedom struggle. In fact, there was a request to Britain not to leave. But Britain made it clear that it wants to leave. And I think it is not clear, but perhaps the initial idea that these states should join hands and create a union might have been coming from the Britain. But what we know is that Sheikh Zayed bin Sultan Al Nahyan was the creator of the idea, who then joined hands with the ruler of the Dubai, who was then the famous Sheikh Rashid bin Saeed Al Maktoum, who was the father of the current, father or the grandfather or the uncle of the current ruler, Sheikh Rashid of Dubai. Together they joined hands. They created the Union Accord of 1968, in which Dubai and Abu Dhabi merged themselves together. They created a common foreign policy, a common defense policy, a security policy, and also an immigration policy. They had separate legal system, internal court system, legal administration was different, but common policy in terms of foreign policy, in terms of immigration policy, in terms of defense policy, they entered. And then together, both these gentlemen, these leaders, started inviting the other states that we all should join together, and we should create a system called the Emirati system, that is the UAE, United Arab Emirates. And these 7 states, not only these 7 states which are now like Abu Dhabi, Dubai, Sharjah, Rais Al Khaimah, Ajman, Al Quwain, which is Little Herd, and Fujairah, but also initially they invited Qatar and Bahrain to become part of the system. Until 1971, there was in fact a sort of a union of state in which Qatar and Bahrain were also part. But in 1971, Qatar and Bahrain left the system, and then the rest 7 states joined together and created the UAE system in 1971.
One of the things is that Sheikh Nahyan is considered to be one of the spiritual leaders of the UAE. I mean, in what way, apart from, of course, combining his forces with the Sheikh Rashid, what is the other way that he has become this inspirational spiritual leader of the country?
Najma, very few people now, the present generation of Indians and Pakistanis, because Indians are the largest diaspora workers in UAE system, about 2.6 million, and Pakistanis are about 1.3 or 1.4 million people. Very few of them know this thing, that how poor Dubai and Abu Dhabi had been in 1960s. The whole economy was fishing and pearls and nothing else. And in fact, people from these areas used to come for good time or for holidays, or even for looking for job and employment in Karachi, when Karachi was in fact the most important coastal town in the region near Persian Gulf. So the vision of Sheikh Zayed bin Al Nahyan has created this enormous wealth. And whereas the Pakistani lens has been looking at them only through the oil and the petrodollar, the reality is this, that Sheikh Zayed bin Al Nahyan and his descendants have created multiple ideas. the idea of creating free ports, marketing areas, for instance, how Dubai was created as a free port, the internal stability. I think one of the biggest contribution, what Sheikh Zayed bin Sultan Al Nahyan did was actually, is a 3-year process between 1968 and 71, that they brought together all the rulers of the other 7 sister states, and they created a common agreement. Because even while they were crucial states, they had conflicts with each other. They kept on fighting with each other. They never could create a common system in which they could live together. They were afraid of each other. So this diplomatic arrangement in which he brought them together, and then the process of actually economic development. Yes, the oil prices increased, but the starting of development of the infrastructure, and then the development of the port, the free city, the trading concept. I mean, all these concepts started to create from 1970s and 1980s onwards, and enormous wealth has been generated in the Emirati system. I mean, this is his contribution.
Right. So, I mean, I agree 100% that that's the whole spiritual element of how he's contributed on different levels. But if we look at UAE now and the role that it has assumed in the world today, what would you say are the direct reasons for why we have the UAE playing such an important role today?
I think what has happened is not only the contribution of the UAE decision makers is there. I mean, they have very intelligently, first of all, Britain has always remained part of their external leveraging. Even when you go to Dubai, if you look very keenly at the Dubai's administrative structure, its court structure, its infrastructure, and you look at the service industry, the financial structure, the banking, you see Britain has a very strong footprint in Dubai and Abu Dhabi. And Britain is a very respected power in Dubai and Abu Dhabi and Emirati system. Unlike United States, which doesn't have much of a footprint. Now, after the Abrahamic Accord, Israel and United States might have a greater role in terms of business, in terms of investment, in terms of tourism and traveling and so on. But from 1970s to this point, as the system has grown for the past 50 plus years, Britain has been an important presence and an important guiding spirit as well. So other changes have also taken place. What is called as there has been a shift in the center of gravity of the Middle Eastern politics. In 1970s and 80s, the most important Middle Eastern states were the states with larger population and large armed forces. For instance, Egypt, Syria, Iraq, Iran, and some of the African countries. Now, when you look at this, in terms of when you take newspaper anywhere in the world, or you just want to read about anything on the Google, you see that the important states in terms of global financial transactions, global trade, investments are UAE, Dubai, Abu Dhabi, Saudi Arabia, Qatar, Bahrain, and Oman. They have become far more important in terms of the global interest. These are the tourism centers. These are the centers where international organizations...
No, but that's what I want to try and understand. How has it assumed this importance?
Because of the rise of the Dubai. I mean, the first most important thing that has happened is how Dubai, which didn't have much of the oil, initially it had the oil, but now for the past several years, Dubai doesn't have the oil. The emergence of Dubai as a center for trade, the emergence of Dubai as a regional hub for the airline. I mean, look at Emirates, followed by the Abu Dhabi Airlines,
right.
Which is...
It's the world's largest...
What is this called, the Abu Dhabi Airlines?
Abu Dhabi is Etihad.
Etihad. I mean, the emergence of Emirates, Etihad, the Qatar. I mean, these airlines as regional hubs, right? The emergence of first of all, the emergence of trade center and the port, then the emergence of the financial and insurance sector right. industry, then the emergence of tourism, then the emergence of the regional politics, and now with the Abrahamic Accord, this region is set to take off. And
okay, you keep mentioning the Abrahamic Accord. What do you think is different now that the UAE and Bahrain also have signed the Abrahamic Accords?
I mean, first of all, there was in fact a growing security threat and perception, which we do not fully understand, and we are not as sensitive to it. But when you talk to the Emirati decision makers, as we got the opportunity in January, when we talked and we had lunches, and since we were stuck because of the COVID, so we understand that the Iran factor has always been very important. And don't forget, when we go in the history where we start, that even the crucial states had British guarantee from the British Empire. that they will be protected from the potential aggression of the other external Arab and the regional states. So since they didn't have population, and as I mentioned, the UAE's total population in 1971 was only 270,000. So you can imagine these states who didn't have local inhabitants, could not raise large armies, didn't have the resources for developing the defense infrastructure. So they have concentrated and focused on developing the diplomatic leverage, the financial leverage. They have opened themselves up to the world. And now with Abrahamic Accord, they have aligned themselves with the powerful Jewish lobby, which is principally the financial lobby, and which also has a lot of influence inside the United States. So now the system in the form of the MBS and the MBZ has become so confident that recently, after the Russia thing, when the American president wanted to pressurize them to basically raise the oil output to let the prices down, both Mohammed bin Salman and Mohammed bin Zayed, MBZ and MBS, refused taking.
What kind of role do you think they played in getting this Abrahamic Accord signed?
What kind of role they played, or what kind of? I don't understand your question.
I mean, do you think how important were they? Because they're both assumed to be obviously very important in the region. Mohammed bin Zayed is seen to be extremely important in the UAE as well. Do you think he was the one who was personally driving this, the signing of the Abrahamic Accords?
If you add another name to this, which is little heard, which is Yusuf bin Utaiba, which is the ambassador of the UAE in Washington, which according to my understanding is one of the most influential diplomat in the Washington system in the Beltway politics. So much so when the diplomats arrive in Washington, they are advised that, you need to be on the right side of Yusuf bin Utaiba, and his wife is a great celebrity in Washington. I think she's a designer or something, and this couple is very important. So I think the concept of the Abrahamic Accord was a very essential need for Israel. Israel is a very small state. I mean, while we look at Israel
only for Israel, not for UAE?
No, to begin where the idea is actually beginning, is basically, it is not beginning in 2017, 18, and 19. You see, Israel, while we look at the Israel from the lens of Israeli aggression, which is even going on right now, Israel as an outpost of United States, Israel being supported by the West, and Israel has done so many wars, against almost every Arab country in the neighborhood, and Israel is basically seen by us as a destructive force. Deep inside, when you look at the Israeli publications and Israeli literature, you see a very deep sense of insecurity. Israelis are very educated people. They have a very great sense of history. They understand this thing that if their Arab neighbors, while they have won all these wars against them with the help of United States, but the global politics can change anytime. And if the Arab neighbors and the Middle East around them does not accept their right to exist and does not give them legitimacy, so Israel's future will always be at risk. And that is why Israel is so aggressive with any kind of resistance from the Arab states. So Israelis suffer from a very deep sense of insecurity. Now, the Trump administration wanted to find a solution. It also found there was an Iran insecurity in the Arab states, and they have put forward this idea during the Trump administration, in which the Emiratis leadership has seen that they have a lot of advantages in going along with the Abrahamic Accord. And this is how the Abrahamic Accord has moved forward, built on the insecurities in Israel for its future, and built on the Iran insecurity in the Arab system. This is how the Abrahamic Accord has gone ahead as a win-win formula for both sides. It gives a sense of legitimacy to Israel. It gives a sense of power, a leverage in the Western system, investment, trade opportunities for the UAE system. When we were there in January, we saw, and others also told us, that how droves and droves of Israeli tourists and businessmen are now in Dubai.
What does this mean for Pakistan? UAE has become very, very significant in Pakistani economics, especially. We have over 1.3 billion people living there, sending back remittances. Last year, fiscal year, remittances were over $6 billion. Last government, former Prime Minister Imran Khan's government, as well as Shehbaz Sharif recently, Prime Minister Shehbaz Sharif, also went to the UAE to ask for loans as well. What is this increasing importance of the UAE for Pakistan?
You see, first of all, it's important to see, Najma, that how this balance of power has shifted from Pakistan in favor of the Middle Eastern countries. In 1960s, Pakistan was in a position to extend loan to Saudi Arabia. Pakistan was in a position to help UAE, Qatar, Bahrain, and all of that. Pakistan had intelligent workforce. Pakistan had the technical skill. It had a very large army. It was very close to Western powers, United Kingdom and US at that time. So Pakistan was basically looked up to. Many Pakistanis still yearn for those days. I mean, Imran Khan is one of those people who yearn and look up to those days. I mean, in 1960s, when Field Marshal Ayub Khan visited Saudi Arabia, the Shah of the Saudi Arabia, the king, personally received him at the airport, right? So in the last 30, 40 years, the center of gravity has totally shifted towards Saudi Arabia, towards UAE, towards Qatar from Pakistan. So Pakistan has become weak. Its sovereignty is reduced. I mean, look at the economic terms. Now UAE, Saudi Arabia and Qatar have become huge financial stakeholders in the Pakistani system. I mean, Prime Minister Shahbaz Sharif went looking for $3 billion additional dollars from Saudi Arabia. He wanted a rollover of the $3 billion previous facility. He also wanted to expand the $1.2 billion oil deferment facility to $2.4 billion. Thus, he was asking for a package of literally $8 billion. I mean, similarly, he expected another $2 to $3 billion from UAE, and I think they also expect some money from Qatar. So, while the center of gravity has moved away from Egypt, Syria, and Iraq towards these Gulf, kingdoms, the center of gravity has also moved from Pakistan in their favor, and they have become very important players. Now, I saw a news item that Tony Blinken apologized to MBZ about them, not the American. They said when the Houthi missile issue took place from Yemen, we are sorry, we didn't take your concerns very seriously. I mean, this is why, because they want the help against Russia on the Ukraine issue. So the American Secretary of State is apologizing. When was the last time you had seen that the American Secretary of State had apologized and it was a news item to Pakistan? That, we ignored your sensitivity, we were not sensitive to you in Afghanistan, we ignored you on something like this. So look at the leverage which they have created.
We just get lectures of do more.
So we get lectures from do more. But I mean, today Washington does not have the capability and leverage to tell MBZ and MBS to do more for them. I mean, it's very difficult for them. So this is the real power in a changing global kaleidoscope. Now, you see, Pakistani diasporas, there are 1.4 million Pakistanis working across the UAE's total population of 10 million and 2.6 million Indian. So Pakistan is the second largest diaspora. But if you look at that India is 7 times the size of Pakistani population. So in terms of percentage export from Pakistan, we are the single largest exporting country into the UAE system. But sadly, as you have seen, the great majority of Pakistanis are doing blue-collar jobs. I mean, they're taxi drivers, small traders, small shopkeepers, whereas Indians hold a supply chain, they hold a telecom sector, and they're very strong presence in the financial sector. And when the Indian companies speak to the UAE system, the UAE system takes the Indian corporate world very seriously. This is what the leverage is. That is why the largest temple in UAE and so on. So, I mean, these are the important issues we need
What do you think could be the major lessons for Pakistan to heed about the direction and the movement the UAE has taken to assume a bigger role in the world?
I think first of all is this, that Pakistani intelligentsia and the system has never seriously understood this shift in the center of gravity toward these Arab kingdoms. I mean, they have understood from a practical sense because we asked for their debt and oil deferment, but we haven't really understood the kind of change and revolution and restructuring that has taken place, in the Sheikhdom, right? The second thing is, we haven't really worked on the nature of diplomacy. For instance, if you look at there are 22 Arab-speaking countries, not only the GCC and the UAE system, but
African.
Hardly any Pakistani ambassador posted over there, his deputy chief of mission, his military attaché, his trade guy or his media person over there speaks Arabic. There is one single language that connects these 22 countries. So Arabic is very important. If I were a Pakistani decision maker, I would tell the Foreign Office and I would tell the Pakistani government that everyone that goes there, even not only the officers but their wives, have to take a crash course into Arabic so that they can engage the Middle Eastern families. Because you see, when it comes to, people look at the English-speaking class in Dubai, which is mostly Indian, Pakistani, Filipino or Egyptian or the English and whatever. The local population and their, wives of the administrative people, who are their local executives, their wives speak Arabic. So this is one important aspect. Then the nature of the workforce which we are basically sending, we need to be sending more doctors, more nurses, more technical people, the IT people, and we need to set up We should just wind it up because it's getting longer. We should need to set up technical training centers in cities like Islamabad, Rawalpindi, Peshawar, Lahore, Faisalabad, and Karachi and Quetta, so that our workforce that goes over there is well versed with Arabic, English, and has some kind of technical thing, so that they move up the food chain over there. I mean, it saddens me when I look at the poor conditions of the Pakistani workforce in those areas.
We thank you so much for sharing your thoughts with us today.